One of the questions that I've been asked a lot over the years is when someone says, okay, everything's collapsing, where can I go that I'm going to be safe? Or more specifically, they might say, Joe, you moved to Barichara, Colombia. Why is that the most safe place? And I always tell them it isn't, because maybe nowhere on earth is safe. And honestly, we have no idea. We cannot say which places are more safe and which places are less safe because of the incredible and overwhelming complexity of the changes that are happening. And so I want to offer you a strategy that helps us deal with this ignorance. So I want to start with 3 different categories of knowledge. There's what we know, then there's what we know that we don't know, what we know that we're ignorant of, and then there's what we don't know, And I made that one bigger because how do you even know the boundaries of what you don't know that you don't know? But I think we can safely say it's huge. What we need is a strategy that works for all 3. A strategy that addresses what we know. For example, we know it's too late to stop abrupt climate change. Okay, we know that. What we don't know is exactly when and how extreme weather events are going to occur, where they're going to hit. What we also don't know is something like what weaponized artificial intelligence will do as technocratic psychopaths try to do the last resource grabs of the planet as our financial and global system is collapsing. Whoa. So there's what we know, what we don't know, but we know we don't know, and then what we don't know, we don't know. We need a strategy for all 3. I want to show you a strategy for all 3. If you look at this dandelion growing in a crack in a sidewalk, no one could have predicted the exact location of this seed, or that it would actually find something to take root in, that there would be sufficient moisture for it to germinate and for it to grow above the cracks. A dandelion has a strategy that addresses all 3 categories of knowledge. So what we want to do is trust evolution to show us the way when we don't know where to plant seeds, we don't know which ones will germinate, and we don't know which ones will take root. The strength of this strategy is through diversity in numbers. The more people who embody the strategy and put it into practice, and the more places they put it into practice, the more likely this strategy is resilient. So we need to embrace the emergent process. So I'm going to only briefly mention what is a bioregional learning center. All I want to say now about bioregional learning centers is that they are the coherent and holistic way of learning how to live in place at the scale of a bioregion, including what came before, how things came to be the way they are, and what needs to happen to regenerate our bioregions to make them healthy and harmonious into the future. So bioregional learning centers are integrated and holistic processes of collective intelligence for entire bioregions. Also, they're the only game in town. Back in 1971 and 1972, a very important book was written and published called Limits to Growth. Dana Meadows, who was the lead author of that report, which became the Limits to Growth study, throughout a period of 10 years between 1972 and 1982, gathered with people in a group called the Balaton Group, and the best sustainability thinkers of the day met all over the world at universities and conferences during a 10-year period. And this Balaton Group came out in an essay written by Dana Meadows in 1983 called A Brief History of the Balaton Group. And she said this: out of these 10 years of meetings with the best sustainability thinkers of the time came a vision of a number of centers where information and models about resources and the environment are housed. There would need to be many of these centers all over the world, each one responsible for a distinct bioregion. Or said another way, in 1983, the best strategy sustainability thinkers could come up with to bring the Earth back within planetary limits, which is to get to sustainability, was to create a planetary network of local living economies organized as bioregions, each one having a bioregional learning center. Guess how many better ideas have come about since 1983? 0. This is the only way to do it. So I wrote a book where I took ideas like these from people like Dana Meadows and offered the design pathway for how we create a planetary network of bioregions where local people create the learning pathways for regeneration at all necessary scales, and the design school was born from that. So our core focus is to create a planetary network of regenerative bioregions using bioregional learning centers. So how are we doing at implementing this strategy? Well, we want to offer a vision for the next 10 years as the collapse processes of the world intensify. Now, right now, there are what I would call several early stage bioregional learning centers. There's Bioregional Learning Center UK. There's Thera, which is in Tarn-et-Garonne in France, which is just getting started in the last 2 years. There is the work in Vale de Sinal in Brazil that has been going for about 10 years. There is the work that we've been doing on territorial regeneration in Bartachara, Colombia. There is Regenerate Cascadia, etc., and so forth. There are several early stage bioregional learning centers, but they're largely underdeveloped. They're still in their early days. They have a lot of work to do to mature, and they're isolated from each other and not working together. So what we want to do in the next several years is move toward regional hubs with bioregional learning sites, and I'll explain more about how we're doing that in a moment, and to arrive by 2035 with a planetary network of bioregional learning centers, or BLCs for short, all over the planet. So we in the design school are preparing to launch a BLC action network to support design school members who create their own bioregional learning centers. And we want to evolve this toward regional hubs. Regional hubs would be things like a network of learning sites in the Great Lakes with a Great Lakes hub, or a network of learning sites in Cascadia, like landscape hubs, which is what Regenerate Cascadia is doing now, coordinated with a Regenerate Cascadia hub. Similarly, for the Amazon rainforest, the Himalayas, the Mediterranean, the rivers of the North Sea, and so forth. A dandelion strategy for seeding the world, because we estimate that there are somewhere between 500 and 2,000 bioregions on Earth. The reason we don't have an exact number is because each bioregion needs to emerge from its own local process, honoring its own local culture and its own local ecology. And it needs to emerge with a coherent, sovereign, and autonomous identity. No outsider can create a map of the bioregion because that is just a colonizer drawing maps. So we don't know the exact number, but we know that the number is somewhere between 500 and 2,000. So to hedge our bets, our ignorance, we think that there should be at least 1,000 BLCs in the world in the next 10 years. So to create this planetary network of BLCs, we need to ask very important questions like, how do we fund this? Now, those of you who have been with us in the design school for a while know that there are 31 recorded regenerative finance labs, and many of them deal with the Earth Regeneration Fund, how funding pools work for regenerating the Earth, how the Bioregional Activation Funding Pool operated last year to support early stage bioregional organizing, and so forth. For our purposes today, I just want to say that we need funding pools with flows of funding between them, between the planetary scale to regional scales, to local regenerative projects and processes. And we need this multi-scale nesting of funding pools to work. But what does the process look like, however we manage to do the funding, to create this planetary network? To make it understandable, we've divided it into 3 parts that you could think of as a sequential developmental process, or as processes running in parallel with different focus. One is what we call activate. In the activate stage, We're catalyzing bioregional imagination, helping people to think in this way, and learn about the BLC strategy. Learn what a bioregion is, learn about earth regeneration, learn what bioregional learning centers are and how to create them, and so forth. This leads to people who are activated deciding that they're ready to form a local team and create their own new BLC that joins the network. This is the stage we call create a bioregional learning center. And as these BLCs join the planetary network, we have the stage or the process of circulate. Circulate is the continual exchanges within and among the BLCs in the planetary network. So let's go through each of these one at a time. The activate stage is basically everything we're doing in the design school right now. So in the design school, we have learning journeys where people learn about this strategy, they learn about bioregionalism, they awaken their bioregional imagination, they learn all kinds of things to activate them toward this strategy. We have tons of educational resources, 1,000 or more recorded sessions and webinars, and all kinds of group processes. We have an online community, and we have place-based hubs that have already formed and new ones that are forming. All of these are moving toward a threshold where specific people in this community say, I'm ready to create a BLC. But we also do bioregional activations and pilgrimages on the ground. So starting in 2022, Penny and I began doing bioregional activations. We did one in November of 2022 in the Central Rockies. That was the front range of the Colorado Rockies, as well as the Western Slopes. And then we did a bioregional activation in January and February 2023 in the Great Lakes. In May of 2023, we did an activation through the Colorado River Basin. In October of 2023, we did a 30-day bioregional activation that actually helped regenerate Cascadia. Then in 2024, in April, we did a bioregional activation in the forests of the Northeast, sort of present-day New England and part of Nova Scotia. And then throughout 2025, we did bioregional activations in the Northern Andes and Colombia. And this year, we're planning bioregional pilgrimages into the Mississippi Basin, the Mediterranean, and Western Europe, where bioregional organizing is already happening. And so this is how we see the bioregional perspective in many different places over a short period of time and build capacities toward weaving at the planetary scale. As we do these pilgrimages and bioregional activations and travel through the landscapes, local people host local events to catalyze this way of thinking and invite people into the network. This is the primary way that people have become design school members in the last 3 years, by enrolling in a learning journey or hearing about us through a bioregional activation. So that's why in this learning journey, in June, we want to awaken the heart of the Mississippi Basin by doing a bioregional pilgrimage across the Mississippi Basin, starting in St. Louis, visiting major headwaters and confluences across this massive pinkish colored thing in the middle of North America. And then also in September and early October, throughout the Mediterranean and Western Europe, where Penny and I will travel and design school members will be invited to host local gatherings to receive us or to receive local people in parallel with us if we're not in the same location, to awaken this bioregional imagination in lots of places and seed the idea that more people can create bioregional learning centers. The second stage of create is when someone decides they're ready to create their own BLC. So here we move toward regional hubs and bioregional learning sites all over the world. As Penny and I gather people together who will help us to design the BLC Action Network in the next few months, we're designing it for the people who want to create a bioregional learning center, meaning to be eligible to join this action network, you need to already have a BLC or have a team that is creating one. And you'll have to apply to join this network, because this network will establish its own governance and coordination mechanisms among the members of the network for learning exchanges between bioregional learning centers and resource flows among them. So what kinds of things will we do in this action network? We'll do things like host leadership retreats and invite people who have founded bioregional learning centers to come together and develop strategies and share learnings with each other. To form regional hubs like a Mediterranean hub, a Great Lakes hub, a Northern Andes hub, and so forth. To establish funding pools and mobilize and share resources with each other. To cultivate shared capacities. An example of a shared capacity might be to create a shared GIS or Geographic Information Systems infrastructure for bioregional mapping, or a shared capacity for storytelling by pooling funding into a storytelling capacity to tell the stories of the BLCs in the Action Network. These are two examples. The other capacities would emerge from the governance of the Action Network itself. And also to coordinate efforts toward Earth regeneration. So what you can see here is that this action network is a critical piece of infrastructure for manifesting a planetary network. But as this BLC action network takes form, we want to enable continual exchanges among the BLCs. This could be learning exchanges. This could be sending teachers from one place to another. This could be financial flows. We could actually design a passport system and a currency system to mobilize resources and move them between bioregions. There is so much potential here. The idea that underlies it all and makes it coherent is to bring attention to the living flows of energy and resources that already exist for the planet, and dynamically align this planetary network with the restoration of health and vitality to Earth's biosphere. So as you can see in this image, which shows you the hydrosphere or the water of the Earth, that we need to restore health to ocean currents, to watersheds, to mountains, to ecosystems, and that the BLCs can coordinate with each other to do this kind of work. So there might be a BLC network to regenerate the Amazon basin, just as an example. There are many different shared agendas that will emerge through the BLC network. So you could think of it like this. A bunch of bioregional learning centers form. This action network encourages and supports interactions and exchanges among them. And there's a continual flow of information, financial resources, infrastructure, tools, shared frameworks, etc., flowing across the network continuously, just as how water is continually flowing through the biosphere of the Earth. I want to remind us the time frame that we're doing this in, to remind us that the human population is likely to reach its peak soon and begin to go down, and the people regenerating the Earth are only a subset of the population, and their population is probably going to go down too. So we have a really important challenge. How do we create resilience during collapse that is translocal? What is translocal? Basically, each bioregion everywhere on Earth needs to cultivate its own holistic approach to being resilient in its own place as disasters and collapse processes unfold. We need a translocal strategy, or a strategy for many locations at the same time in parallel, because many places will not survive the collapse process. We need to plant cultural seeds everywhere so that some of them can survive, and we need to help as many as possible to be resilient as we enter the most intense period of collapse, which will be the next few decades. So that's our strategy. How do we make this concrete and actionable? How do we land this into the learning journey itself? Well, remember that the learning journey runs from March through September for 6 months. It's divided into 2 parts: laying the groundwork and a time for design practice. The immersive experiences are the bioregional pilgrimages. And so what we need to do is increase the reach that this strategy reaches and gets to more people, more places, and more different kinds of flow, including financial flow, to enable this strategy to manifest throughout the learning journey and beyond it. One of the ways that we can do this is to share stories about the strategy as it's emerging. So I've already created a Substack a little bit more than a month ago, and I'm encouraging people to join me. So find Joe Brewer on Substack if you want to follow along and share resources there. Also, we encourage all of you as design school members to tell your own stories about how you are living out this strategy where you are. And we have Bioregional Earth that we co-founded and Penny and I are co-stewards of with Brian Pupa and Susan Bozak of the Legacy Project, where we will release regular bulletins of important news about what's happening with Bioregional Earth. So these are the ways that the stories can come out into the world. Please tell your stories and invite people into this process. Also, Penny and I have been working to design a new Earth Regenerators website that we will be implementing and publishing in the coming weeks when we can make time to do it. It's in our work plan. And this Earth Regenerators website will make this whole strategy visible and accessible to the public. Also, we have a design school funding pool that I'll talk about in a moment that will catalyze actions to enable these stories to emerge. And we have a bioregional pilgrimage through the Mississippi Basin in the month of June, and a bioregional pilgrimage into the Mediterranean and Western Europe in September and October that will catalyze this further and bring this conversation to more places as we move toward the launch of the BLC Action Network later this year. So the learning journey is helping to scaffold this process and strengthen it as we go in the coming months. So one of the parts of this strategy is funding pools. So funding pools for manifesting this strategy are really important. And I want to tell you about one that you may not even know you're already participating in, which is that design school membership dues go into a funding pool. And that funding pool has already been funding design immersions to begin to catalyze bioregional organizing. It has already been funding bioregional activations. It funds the existence of this technology platform and these learning journeys. It funds people to be community stewards of the design school. And so your membership dues are already funding this strategy simply by paying your $5 a month or $50 a year. And now we have a new level that I'll talk about in a moment. But this is how we're moving toward the planetary network of BLCs by just being members of the design school and paying our membership dues. So you're not paying membership dues for a learning journey, you're contributing into a funding pool for regenerating Earth through this planetary network. And because we've now had more than 1,400 people pay design school membership dues, we have more than 1,400 unique contributors into this funding pool in the last 3 years, and that number is growing every time a new member joins us. And we have deployed more than $500,000 into the creation of bioregional funding ecosystems, bioregional activations, design immersions, and other processes through the design school in the last 3 years, and we need to deploy a hell of a lot more than that. And you might have seen about a week ago, we revealed a new lifetime membership to the design school for $500 to get the Active Hope membership plan. And if we can get 50 new people to join this Active Hope plan, we'll raise $25,000 for this year's bioregional pilgrimages to help further plant seeds of BLCs in North America, the Mediterranean, and Europe. And of course, we have a much larger strategy for nested funding pools. And we have a vision for an Earth Regeneration Fund for 1,000 BLCs, but I don't want to go into the details of that now. We'll be sharing that when we have the material ready to share. So more on this later in the learning journey. Just to say that we envision raising $1 billion or more if we're able to find people who are aligned with this purpose, because we're going to need to flow a lot of resources into a network with 1,000 bioregional learning centers. And just as a reminder that we need a strategy that works for what we know, what we don't know, and what we don't know that we don't know. And that's what the Dandelion Strategy for 1,000 bioregional learning centers enables us to do.